You know, so there's things that modify. The beach court is a lot smaller. Of course, you're only playing with two, but that changes the tactics of the game. So, you know, it's. I mean, the basic principles are similar, but you know, there's a great statement that I like a lot. It's a principle: is the game teaches the game. Okay, so in other words, coaches don't teach the game. Okay, the game teaches the game. The situation that occurs. What we do is we hopefully give kids the tools to play the game, and then as they get into the situations, they will apply those skills. And so as a result, just the inherent differences of the two different venues, if you will, that they're playing on will change that. You know, and what's the attraction of the beach? Here's, and people get irritated at this, but if you took just 2-on-2, people 2-on-2, even if they're pretty good, and there's no glitz around it, none of the glamour that the FIVB and AVC, I mean not AVC, AV put into the game. If you took all that out, it's just good 2-on-2. It can be a pretty boring game. Pass it, and now and then there's a pretty good save, but if you watch, I mean, even at the Olympic Games, they've got cheerleaders and music, and it's skin. I mean, and I challenge anybody to go to Google and put in beach volleyball and then hit images, and see what the pictures are that are coming up. They're not tactical, if you know what I mean. Now and then you'll see somebody making a dive and save, but well, you just have to go see it, and then you go, oh, is that the appeal of beach volleyball? You know. That's not necessarily the appeal of the six-player game. So they're both, I think, feed off each other, of course. And beach volleyball is really fun to play. So from that point of view, you know, I mean, it's really fun. But so is all of them.
If you had to, could you break this game down into 4 fundamental things?
The six-player game?
Yeah. 4
fundamentals as opposed to 6. Well, yeah, I suppose. Because it's traditionally people look at it as 6 individual skills make up the game. Basic skills. There are some adaptations, but you could say ball handling is 1. Okay. Serving, attack, defense, and now you notice I didn't say blocking. So, and you almost have to, because blocking is its own frustrating skill, but it's probably at the lower levels, younger levels, it becomes the least of the skills that is needed to be learned until you get up older, and it's bigger in the men's game, blocking, at that point. But if you look at how points are scored, that'd be a way of looking. What do we need to work on? This that you work on the skills that score your points. Blocking is always at any level the lowest, but and this is the one that we debate all the time as coaches, is what's the influence of blocking on scoring? So in other words, and everybody assumes that great blocking is a stuff, and it isn't. I mean, it actually happens. I mean, the best blockers are maybe blocking a little bit over 1 block a game, you know, a stuff block, and you go, oh, that's fun, you know. But what the blocks influence, that's a different thing. Is that you make hitters hit out of bounds, you make them tip, they hit into the defense. I mean, there's a huge influence on the game of blocking, but it's kind of buried in the overall scheme. If that kind of.
So there's a strategy more than just slowing the ball down.
Yeah, I think blocking has, other than setting and running an offense, has the most tactical applications. But I also think that not a lot of teams use the stuff that you're capable of doing blocking. So there's some pretty cool things you can do blocking. Most people aren't doing it right now.
Are there 1, 2, 3, or 4 different types of coaching philosophies out there now?
There's lots. I don't know. Is it 4? Is it? I don't know. I know there's lots, and the different philosophies. I guess what concerns me most, especially in coaching education, is that there are some will say this is the only way of doing it. A coach will go to a coaching clinic and say, this is it. You want to win, this is how you do it. I think that's wrong. I mean, because no sooner than you say that, someone else comes up with something different, and guess what? You know, and if you tell everybody this is how you do it, and you had a coaching clinic and now they play each other, what do? Tie? You know, I mean, who wins? I mean, you're going to have, you know, I mean, that's obviously being facetious, but the coaching philosophy has to be built around the coach and what they have learned over time and how they can best apply themselves to the situation. Volleyball is volleyball. You know, there are some irrefutable principles, I believe, that, you know, for example, an example of a principle would be, we're going to expose our strengths. Well, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't know anybody who'd go, no, we're going to expose our weaknesses. I guess that would be a philosophy you wouldn't be lasting too long. So everybody, regardless of how you teach the game, I think would agree with that. Excuse me. Another one would be simpler is better. You know, the simpler you can make something, the better it is. It's easier to execute. Again, I've never heard anybody go, you know, the more complex you can make things, the better it is. I mean, it just doesn't, that wouldn't make sense. There are motor learning principles that are pretty solid. But then it gets down to, you know, the philosophies will change on how feedback is given, you know, positive reinforcement, you know, words you use, and then of course the tactical, you know, things. Right now, I think almost all teams are cloning each other at all levels. And I mean, I can almost always take any team and I can put their lineup without even seeing them and say, this is how they're organized in their rotational organization. You hardly see anybody do it any different. And so that kind of bothers me a little bit, because I'm an old school coming that, you know, let's play the what if game. What if we do this? But it basically right now, if you play one team, especially if they come from a consistent philosophy, you're playing them all. It'll be the same. And it's just how good they are physically. And I know way back in '84 when we won a gold medal, the Russians at that time, the Soviet Union was the best team of this men in the world. And they'd been just dominating for years prior to that. And they're big, huge, they still are, big, huge guys, and we weren't that big. You know, and I remember Doug Beal and I sitting in our office going, if we're going to win the gold medal, we can't try to play like the Russians. We got to do something and force them to have to play to us. So we changed the way the game was played. But the philosophy was based upon, we're going to play our way. And we're going to create some systems that force the other team to do something different, that they can't just dominate the environment because they have. But right now I don't see that. You know, Brazil has long been dominating, and a lot of people are trying to, and that's a traditional thing, is that people will copy the champion. And then at the international level, which it filters down, whoever wins, that's who everybody tries to play like. And I mean, after we won, we changed the whole game and switched to what was called a swing offense, and we used 2 players receiving, and there was a bunch, and the way we trained, to this day, people are still using the stuff that we came up with. I mean, they've modified it, made it better, and so on, but it really changed the tradition. But that's very common. I asked the Japanese one time, after for a while, they dominated, and they came up with a whole new way of playing the game. And it was fast, they used what was called time differential attack, lots of different things. And I asked Matsudaira, who was the head coach one time, because he was doing clinics all over, they were sending out films, this is how we do it. And I said, I finally pulled him aside, I said, Matsudaira-san, why do you share this? Why do you show the world what you're doing? Because aren't you concerned they'll come back with it and beat you? And he kind of smiled and he said, only the Japanese can play like the Japanese. Everything else will simply be a copy. And he laughed, and I went, I learned from that, is that you figure out what you can do. And, you know, so that was one of the things where Doug and I started, how do Americans play? Not like Russians or Cubans or someone else or Brazil, it's how we play. And we were pretty good at that, I think, in pulling out our strengths, which was kind of individualistic and egotistical, and we took advantage of cockiness and some other stuff, I mean, literally. And we just milked that for all she was worth.
One last question. you've had an opportunity to coach at all different levels, all different types of competition. Is there any one person that stands out in your mind as the volleyball player?
Well, there's been a lot of them. I mean, I've enjoyed them all for whatever reason, and I do that to this day. And I mean, clearly, Karch Karai, who was voted by the International Federation of Volleyball as the greatest player ever in the first 100 years of the game, pretty well answers that. In terms of if you want to say the best player, I mean, I wouldn't argue that. Interestingly enough, there was not, as far as I remember, there was not one statistical category that he was #1 on our team in. Okay, you know, everybody said passing. Now, Aldous Berzins was the best passer maybe ever in the game. He wasn't necessarily the best hitter, the best blocker. But when it came around to a guy that won the next play for you, he'd figure it out. I mean, he was, his attitude is you wish every player ever had. I don't recall, I coached him for about 6 years, and I don't ever recall him having a bad practice. That doesn't mean he always played well, but he never ever had a bad practice because he felt if things were going bad, he could learn something from it. And he's now the assistant coach of the U.S. women, and I hope they're absorbing that because he's very unique in that way. Another guy on that team was one of my favorites. A guy is Steve Timmons, and Timmons now he married the gal from Tool Time. I can't remember her name right now. But
oh, okay.
that's his wife. And
oh, okay.
And he's become, he doesn't coach much now. It's too bad. He's a terrific coach, terrific guy. But when he was coming up, he was one of those guys that was finding his way. But he was a guy you could get right in his grill and get on him, and he would take the challenge, boy. And he and I became very, very close over time. But I mean, there were, you know, you learn about these guys, and the game didn't come easy to him at all. Whereas some guys it did. It didn't come easy to Karch necessarily either. I mean, he worked at it and earned everything he did. But Timmons was, he was on the bubble making the team, and we tested him, and I just love the way he responded to. I mean, there's been, I don't know, I could go on and on about players, including kids that are in this gym. That, you know, people. That was the other call. Throw in one.